I watched my husband slip something into my wine glass on our anniversary, and I switched our glasses before he could say a word. What happened next changed everything I thought I knew about my marriage, my life, and the man I had loved for 9 years. By midnight, the truth wasn't just on the table. It was soaked into the tablecloth, scattered across the floor in the form of documents and accusations, and a glass that had shattered against the wall. But that glass wasn't mine, and that was only the beginning. It started, the real beginning, the kind you don't recognize until it's over, about 8 years before that anniversary dinner. I was 26, working as a marketing coordinator for a mid-size pharmaceutical firm in Denver, renting a studio apartment with walls the color of old oatmeal and a radiator that clanged every night like a tiny, furious ghost. I met Daniel at a mutual friend's birthday party, the kind of party where everyone knows everyone except you, and somehow that made it easier. He was the man in the corner who wasn't performing. While everyone else was laughing too loud at their own jokes or checking their reflections in dark phone screens, Daniel was standing by the kitchen counter, genuinely reading the label on a bottle of olive oil someone had used as a prop decoration. He looked up when I walked over, and the first thing he said was, "Do you know that this is technically a fraud? This is not extra virgin anything." I laughed, not a polite laugh, but an actual one. And we talked for 3 hours and missed the moment the birthday candles were blown out entirely. He was 31, a structural engineer, meticulous in the way that first seems charming and later becomes something else. He liked things level. He liked things where he had put them. He liked plans and margins and contingencies. In those early years, I thought it meant he was dependable. He was the first man I had ever dated who showed up exactly when he said he would, who remembered what I had mentioned offhand 6 weeks ago, who had an opinion about the structural integrity of apartment buildings and shared it with genuine passion. There was something deeply reassuring about all of that precision. After 2 years of dating and 1 year of saving, we bought a house. A 3-bedroom craftsman in a quiet neighborhood in Aurora, Colorado, with a porch that faced west and turned gold every evening around 6. I remember the day we got the keys. Daniel held them for a long time, just feeling their weight in his palm. And then he looked at me with the particular expression he saved for things that mattered and said, "We built something." I felt certain in that moment that we had. We were married the following spring. Small wedding, backyard ceremony at my parents' house, string lights and a bluegrass band that Daniel had found through some arcane methodology involving online reviews and a spreadsheet. My mother cried. Daniel's mother, Patricia, sat in the front row in a floral dress that was slightly too formal for a garden ceremony and smiled tightly at everything. I noticed that, but I filed it away under "Mothers-in-law are complicated" and let it go. My best friend Carla stood beside me as my maid of honor, wearing lavender and whispering bad jokes in my ear every time the minister paused too long. Daniel's brother, Marcus, was his best man, and Marcus was everything Daniel was not, loose-limbed and warm and slightly disorganized, the kind of person who forgot your birthday but made it up to you in extraordinary ways. I liked Marcus immediately and completely. At the reception, Marcus gave a speech that made everyone at the table both laugh and cry within the span of 3 minutes. And Daniel looked at his brother with a complicated mix of exasperation and deep love that I would later understand was their whole relationship distilled into a single expression. The first years of the marriage were genuinely good. I want to say that clearly, without irony, because what came later has a way of casting a retrospective shadow over everything, and I refuse to let it steal what was real. We were good together. We cooked elaborate Sunday dinners, not because either of us was particularly gifted in the kitchen, but because we enjoyed the collaborative project of it. the way we divided tasks naturally without discussion. I handled anything that required seasoning and improvisation. Daniel handled anything that required timing and precision. We took one big trip a year: Portugal, Japan, a week on the Oregon coast that was rainy and perfect. We argued sometimes, the way people who live together eventually do, about money and dishes and whose turn it was to call the plumber. But the arguments resolved. They had a beginning and a middle and an end. I trusted that. I trusted him. What I missed, what I trained myself not to see, were the very small things. The way Daniel could go silent for a full hour without explanation. A particular quality of silence that was not contemplative, but sealed. The way he handled our finances with a thoroughness that had slid, gradually and imperceptibly, from shared management into something that more resembled soul management. He had always been better with numbers, and I had never been interested in spreadsheets. And so, over the years, it had become simply the way things worked. He paid the bills, tracked the accounts, filed the taxes, and I trusted him with all of it because he had given me no reason not to. There was the way he occasionally referred to the house as his, not ours, not in an overtly possessive way, but casually, as in, someone parked in front of my house again, or I want to repaint my living room. I noticed those pronouns. I thought I was being petty for noticing. I noticed the way his mother, Patricia, sometimes called on Sunday afternoons, and Daniel would take the call in his office with the door closed, and when he came out, he would be quiet in that sealed way for the rest of the evening. I asked about it once only, because the way he answered made clear that asking again would be an intrusion. "She was just checking in," he said. "You know how she is." And I did know. I just didn't know what it meant yet. The micro shifts started about 2 years before the anniversary. Subtle enough that I second-guessed my own perception constantly, which I now understand was partly the point. Daniel began working later, which was explainable. He had taken on a major project, a commercial development downtown that demanded long hours. He was distracted at dinner in a way that felt different from normal work distraction. A distance that had a particular texture, as if he was thinking not about something absent, but about something present that he was keeping from entering the room. He started sleeping with his phone face down on the nightstand, which he had never done before. I noticed it the way you notice a piece of furniture moved 2 inches. You can't immediately name what's different, but the space feels wrong. I told myself I was paranoid. I told myself that 9 years of marriage had simply evolved into something quieter and less attentive, and that was normal, and I should not mistake normal for ominous. But there were concrete things, not just feelings. A credit card statement I happened to see on the kitchen counter. Not snooping, it was simply there. That showed a charge from a florist I didn't recognize on a date when I had received no flowers. A text notification that appeared on Daniel's phone screen while he was in the shower. "Did you take care of it?" From a contact named simply R. Nothing more. I saw it from across the room. When Daniel came out and I mentioned that he had a text, he picked up the phone, looked at it, and said, "Work thing," without reading it aloud, without offering any additional texture, and then slid it into his pocket. I made myself let it go. I made myself believe him. I was so thoroughly practiced in the art of believing him that the belief had become almost reflexive, a muscle memory, a habit I performed without thinking. There was also the matter of the savings account. I had discovered this one by accident approximately 3 months before our 9th anniversary, while looking for a statement to fill out a loan application for a home equity line, a joint project we had ostensibly agreed to undertake together. I went looking for our shared savings documentation and found instead that the balance was substantially lower than I had expected. Not alarmingly, not catastrophically, but enough to create a small, cold place in my chest. I mentioned it to Daniel that evening, keeping my voice entirely light, and he explained it. Renovation reserves, he said, an account he had moved funds into separately to keep the house projects organized. I nodded. I thanked him for his organizational diligence. Something in me did not fully dissolve the cold place, but I pressed it down and let it sit there quietly, unnamed, like a stone at the bottom of a still pond. Our 9th anniversary fell on a Thursday in early October. Colorado in October is a specific kind of beautiful. The aspens have already started burning gold and orange in the foothills. The air has that particular edge that smells like wood smoke and dry leaves and something indefinably Western. Daniel had planned the dinner himself, which was notable because in recent years, anniversary dinners had become my domain by default, mostly because Daniel claimed he found the restaurant selection process overwhelming. This year, 2 weeks before the date, he sat down across from me at the kitchen table with what I can only describe as deliberate ease, the practiced relaxation of someone who has rehearsed being casual, and told me he had made reservations at 12, a new restaurant downtown that had received a review in the Post calling it the most romantic new venue in the city. He had booked a private room. He had arranged for champagne on arrival. He seemed, as he described all of this, to be performing the role of a husband who had planned a romantic evening. I watched him perform it and felt a warmth I wanted to lean into, and a small, persistent unease that I deliberately refused to name. I wore the dress I had bought in Lisbon, the deep burgundy one that Daniel had once said made him catch his breath. I curled my hair. I wore the gold earrings my mother had given me for our wedding day, small, leaf-shaped things that I considered my good luck pieces, my talismans. I spritzed on the perfume Daniel had given me 2 Christmases ago, bergamot and sandalwood, the scent of better days. I looked at myself in the mirror before we left, and the woman looking back seemed, on the surface of things, to be exactly what she appeared, a woman dressing for a celebration. I almost believed it. 12 was everything the review had promised. Low lighting, exposed brick, tables set with such deliberate intimacy that even the salt and pepper shakers seemed to lean toward each other. The private room was small and perfect. A round table, 2 chairs, candles in amber glass holders, a single white orchid in a narrow vase. A sommelier brought us wine immediately, a red that Daniel had pre-selected, something French and velvet-edged that I would normally have savored without a thought. We toasted. Daniel held his glass toward mine and said, "To 9 years," and I touched my glass to his and said, "To 9 years," and the crystal made a sound like a small bell, and we drank. The evening had a strange quality of performance about it. Not on my part. I was trying genuinely, reaching toward the warmth I wanted to feel, asking Daniel about the engineering project, laughing at the right moments, touching his hand across the table. The performance was his. He was present in a way that felt constructed, a simulacrum of attentiveness, his eyes warm in a practiced way, his laugh landing a half-beat too perfectly, too smoothly, like someone who had memorized the rhythm of charm and was executing it from memory rather than feeling. I told myself I was projecting. I told myself the stone at the bottom of the pond had made me suspicious of everything, and that was my fault, not his. The appetizers came and went. We moved through a first course that involved carpaccio and a smear of something green and excellent. Daniel refilled my wine without being asked, which he did often at restaurants, a habit of his that I had always read as attentive. I didn't watch him do it. I was looking at the menu for the second course, scanning the options with the pleasant, low-stakes deliberation of someone who fully expected to still be here in 20 minutes, an hour, tomorrow. When I looked back up, Daniel was reaching for his own glass, and as he lifted it, I noticed something. Not a dramatic thing, not something a third party would have caught, just the faint, brief awkwardness of a person who had just done something and was now repositioning their hands as if to erase the doing of it. His right hand moved away from the area near my glass with a fraction too much deliberateness. My eyes went to my wine. I don't know what made me look at his glass instead of mine. Some combination of the stone in the chest and the sealed silences and the florist charge and the contact named R, all of it converging in a single microsecond of attention. His glass was fuller than mine by almost exactly the same amount that mine seemed lighter than I remembered leaving it. And there was something, I could not have said precisely what, a very slight cloudiness near the bottom of my glass, a density to the wine that was not there in his, possibly nothing, possibly everything. My hand, which had been moving toward my glass to take a sip, stopped. My brain ran through the data in about 2 seconds and arrived at a place it did not want to arrive. I sat with it for 3 seconds, 4, 5. Daniel was looking at the menu. He looked comfortable. He looked like a man without a secret. I reached across the table on the pretense of adjusting the orchid in its vase. It was slightly off-center, which Daniel would normally have commented on anyway. And as I leaned, I switched our glasses. Not dramatically, not with any gesture that announced itself. I simply moved his glass to my place and mine to his with the smooth, unhurried motion of a woman who was only rearranging flowers. Then I sat back, and I lifted what had been Daniel's glass, and I drank. The wine tasted exactly as it had before, velvet and dark and French, and without any aftertaste that I could identify. But my hands were cold now, and not from the air conditioning. I watched Daniel reach for what had been my glass. I watched him drink from it. I watched his face for something, a flicker, a start, a tell of any kind. And for a long moment, I saw nothing. We ate our second course. We talked about nothing in particular. His colleague's new baby, a movie I wanted to see, whether we should repaint the porch before winter. 20 minutes into the second course, Daniel excused himself to use the restroom. He was gone for 11 minutes. I know because I watched the time on my phone. When he came back, he looked slightly pale. Not dramatically, not noticeably to a stranger, but I knew his face the way you know a landscape you've looked at every day for 9 years. And something in its topography had shifted. He drank water. He pushed his entree around his plate. He said he thought he might be getting a headache. By the time dessert arrived, which he did not order, he was visibly not well, moving carefully in his seat, speaking with a precision that suggested effort. I ate my crème brûlée. I ate it slowly and with full attention. It was extraordinary. Daniel watched me eat it, and I watched him watching me. And somewhere between us and over the ruins of our anniversary dinner, the truth of what had almost happened was sitting in the air like smoke. Neither of us named it. Not yet. But I knew. And I knew that I knew, and so I could not unknow it. And there was no path from that moment back to the marriage I had believed I was in. We drove home mostly in silence. Daniel said he wasn't feeling well and needed to lie down. I said, of course, I hoped he felt better, and my voice was entirely steady, which surprised me. My hands on the steering wheel were not shaking. The opposite, actually. They were very still, and that stillness felt like something new, like a door closing softly but firmly in a house that had been full of open windows. Daniel went upstairs when we got home, and I heard the bedroom door close. I sat down at the kitchen table in my Lisbon dress with my gold leaf earrings still in, and I put both hands flat on the surface of the table, and I looked at the grain of the wood, and I thought, what just happened? And what does it mean? And what are you going to do now? I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, and then I moved to the couch, and then back to the kitchen. I made tea I didn't drink. The radiator, we had a new one, not the clanging ghost of my old studio, but our craftsman house had its own sounds at night. A low, settling creak in the floorboards, the murmur of wind through the old window frames. Sounds I knew intimately. Sounds that had been the background score of what I had thought was my life. Around 2 a.m, I went upstairs and stood in the doorway of the bedroom for a moment and looked at Daniel sleeping. His breathing was slightly irregular, not alarmingly, but not his normal deep, slow rhythm either. I stood there and I felt many things simultaneously. A compressed mass of feeling that included grief and rage, and something colder and more purposeful that I didn't yet have a name for. I went back downstairs. I sat at the kitchen table again, and this time I opened my laptop. I was not going to confront Daniel blind. Whatever had happened at that dinner, whatever he had added to my glass, whatever he had thought would happen, I needed to understand the whole picture before I moved a single piece. Because if I had learned anything from watching Daniel operate over 9 years, it was that he was a man who planned several moves ahead. And the only way to survive a person like that was to be more patient and more thorough than they expected you to be. I started with the finances. I had access to our joint checking account. Daniel managed it, but I had login credentials I had never particularly used. I logged in and I began looking, not at this week or this month, but backward. Months and months backward. I went back 18 months and I looked at every transaction with the thoroughness that Daniel himself had always applied to things that mattered. What I found in the next 2 hours rewired my understanding of my marriage in a way that was so complete and so surgical that I remember thinking, with a certain horrible clarity, so this is what betrayal actually looks like. It doesn't look like drama. It looks like spreadsheets. The transfers were regular, not large enough individually to trip any obvious alarm. 2,000 here, 1,500 there. Once a slightly larger 5,000 that was listed as home maintenance in the memo field. They went out of our joint account, and I could trace them as far as a secondary account at a different bank, one I did not recognize, one that was not in both our names. I took screenshots. My fingers were moving efficiently, without trembling, which was both strange and somehow exactly right. I wrote down account numbers and dates and amounts in a notebook. An actual paper notebook, the kind Daniel would never think to look for, because Daniel had moved entirely to digital. And I kept going. The total I eventually calculated, over 18 months, was just under $47,000. $47,000 moved, in careful increments, out of the life we had built together, and into somewhere I couldn't see. I sat with that number for a long time. I looked at it written in my handwriting on the pale yellow paper of the notebook. I thought about the savings account that had been lower than expected, the renovation reserves explanation, the smile that had been so measured and reasonable. $47,000 was a plan. $47,000 was a runway. A runway for leaving, or for something. And the specific shape of the something was what I still needed to determine. By 3:30 in the morning, I had found 2 other things. The first was a secondary email account. I found it because Daniel's laptop was open on the counter, sleeping but not locked, and the browser autofill when I typed in our bank URL suggested a different email login that I had never seen. I didn't access the email account directly. I didn't yet have the password. But I photographed the auto-filled address on the laptop screen with my phone. The address was a name I didn't recognize, combined with a number. The second thing I found was simpler and more devastating in the particular personal way that simple things can be. I found a receipt tucked into the inside pocket of the sport coat Daniel had worn to dinner, which I had picked up off the back of his chair in the hall. The receipt was from a jeweler. It was dated 4 months ago. It was for a platinum ring, size 7, engraved. Women's ring sizes run from 5 to 9. I wear a 6.5. I set the receipt on the kitchen table and stared at it for a long time. The engraving was listed as 2 initials, D and R. D and R. Daniel and R. The contact in his phone. The email address. The ring. The tea I had made 2 hours ago sat cold beside my notebook, and the kitchen was very quiet. And I sat in the middle of that quiet and understood that I was not dealing with a mistake, or a moment of weakness, or even a simple affair. I was dealing with a plan. A careful, incremental, meticulous plan, designed by the most organized person I had ever known. And I had been living inside it without seeing it, the way a person can live inside a building without ever thinking about its structural load. I went upstairs. I changed out of my anniversary dress carefully, folding it and putting it back in the closet. I brushed my teeth. I looked at my face in the bathroom mirror for a long time. The woman looking back at me had gold leaf earrings still in. I'd forgotten to take them out, and her eyes were very clear. Not wet, not swollen, just clear and steady in a way I didn't entirely recognize. I took the earrings out. I put them on the bathroom shelf. I went into the guest room and lay down on top of the covers and closed my eyes. And I made a list in my head of what I needed to do. And the list was precise and ordered, and I went through it twice until I had it exactly right. And then I permitted myself 3 hours of something that wasn't quite sleep, but was enough. I called Carla at 6:45 the next morning from my car in the driveway, where Daniel could not hear me through the walls. Carla answered on the second ring, which told me she had been awake already, or at least the mother of a toddler light sleep that constituted awake at that hour. Her voice, when she heard mine, shifted immediately into a different register. Not alarmed, but present, fully present, the way Carla had always been able to be when it mattered. "Tell me," she said, and I told her. I told her everything in one long, organized, uninterrupted sequence. And when I was done, there was a brief silence, and then she said, very quietly, "Oh, Meg. My name is Megan. Most people call me Meg. Daniel had always called me Megan. All of it. Formal, full, no diminution. He said he liked names to be complete. I had thought that was sweetness. Oh, Meg," Carla said, and the syllable landed in my chest with the particular warmth of someone using the smaller, more private version of your name, the one that means I love you, without saying it. "I need a lawyer," I said. "A good one. Not a mediator, not a collaborative divorce person. I need someone who is going to be smarter than Daniel." "I know exactly who," Carla said. "Her name is Diane Forsyth. She's the one who helped my cousin Sarah. She's not cheap, but she's extraordinary." A brief pause. "Are you safe right now?" I thought about the wine glass. I thought about the receipt with the ring and the 2 initials. "I think so," I said. "I'm not sure what was in the glass. I don't know yet if last night was—" I stopped. I didn't want to say what I was thinking. The word that lived at the edge of the thought was a very serious word, the kind that changed everything. "I need to know what it was," I said instead. "Before I know that, I don't know what last night was." Then we find out, Carla said. Get an appointment with Diane today. Today, Meg, before he does anything else. I called Diane Forsythe's office at 8:15, the moment they opened, and her assistant told me she had a cancellation at 11. I said I would be there. I went back into the house. Daniel was in the kitchen when I came in, still in his bathrobe, looking pale and slightly hollowed, nursing a glass of water with the careful movements of a person whose body had spent the night handling something it hadn't expected. He looked up when I came in, and something moved across his face. Not guilt exactly, or not only guilt. Something more calculating, a rapid internal assessment that I caught and cataloged. You look tired, he said. Didn't sleep well, I said. How are you feeling? Better, he said. Something didn't sit right last night. Might have been the fish. His voice was even, explanatory, preemptively normal. I thought, this man is extraordinary at this. And then I thought, or he's been doing it a long time. I'm going to run some errands this morning, I said. I'll be back this afternoon. I poured myself a cup of coffee from the pot he had made, and I sat at the kitchen table and drank it. And I looked at the grain of the wood, and I was very calm. And the calm was real, not performed. It was the calm of a person who has decided what she is going to do and feels the simplicity of that decision like a weight lifted. Daniel sat across from me. We talked, briefly and normally, about plans for the weekend, about a neighbor's new fence, about the weather. We talked about nothing. And beneath every word was the thing neither of us was saying, sitting between us like a third person at the table. Diane Forsythe's office was on the 16th floor of a building downtown, small and precisely furnished in the way of offices that signal competence without ostentation. A clean desk, 2 chairs for clients, a window with a view of the mountains that she clearly never looked at because her attention, when she turned it on you, was total. She was perhaps 60, with close-cropped gray hair and reading glasses on a chain, and the particular quality of stillness that belongs to people who have heard everything and remain unshocked by all of it. Her assistant had offered me water, and I had accepted it, and I was holding the glass when I sat down across from her, and she looked at me and said, "Tell me from the beginning." I told her. I was organized about it. I had my notebook, my screenshots on my phone, the photographs of the account statements, the jeweler's receipt in a small Ziploc bag. When I was done, Diane looked at the materials I had laid on her desk with an expression that was clinical and very focused. And then she looked at me. "The glass," she said. "You believe he added something to your wine." "I'm certain he added something," I said. "I'm not certain what or why." "Did you retain any of the wine?" "No," I said. "But I have the timing. He visited the restroom for 11 minutes after drinking from the glass. He was ill for the rest of the evening and this morning." Diane was quiet for a moment, tapping her pen once against her notepad. "The financial picture is significant," she said. 47,000, carefully distributed over 18 months, consistently under thresholds that would trigger automatic review. This is not impulsive. This is structured. She paused again. "Has he discussed divorce?" "Never," I said. "Not once. Nothing." "Life insurance," she said. "Do you have a policy?" The question dropped into the room with a weight I felt in my sternum. I sat with it for a moment. "Yes," I said slowly. "We both do. We took them out 5 years ago. It was... Daniel suggested it, actually. He handled all the paperwork." Diane made a note. She wrote without hurry, in the methodical way of someone who is not taking notes for herself, but for the record. I want you to call your insurance provider today and get the policy details. Beneficiaries, coverage amounts, any riders. Can you do that? I said I could. Good, she said. Now, here's what we're going to do. What followed was 45 minutes of the most specific and purposeful conversation I had ever had. Diane laid out a sequence of steps with the clarity of a blueprint, and I listened and absorbed and wrote things down in my notebook. The most immediate priority was financial protection. She would file a motion for temporary financial restraining order, which would freeze our joint assets and prevent any further unilateral transfers. She had a forensic accountant she worked with regularly who could trace the secondary account. She recommended I open an individual account today at a bank Daniel did not use and transfer enough from our joint checking to sustain myself for 3 months. She said this was legal and she was advising me to do it. She said I should not confront Daniel, not yet, not until we had the full financial picture and the court filing was ready. She said, "Patience is leverage." "One more thing," I said before I stood to leave. "The glass. Is there any way to determine what was in it, even now?" Diane looked at me steadily. "If he ingested it himself in a meaningful quantity, and if it was a substance that's detectable in blood work, and if you can arrange for him to have blood work done, or if he goes to a doctor about his symptoms, there may be a record. Did he see a doctor this morning?" "I don't know," I said. "He was home when I left." "If he did, and if there's a finding, that becomes a different kind of case entirely," Diane said. "Keep that possibility open." I left her office and stood in the elevator on the way down, and the mountains were visible through the lobby window at the bottom, wide and white-capped and indifferent to everything that was happening inside the building, and I thought, okay, one step at a time, one careful, irreversible step at a time. The next 3 days were the strangest of my life. I was living inside 2 realities simultaneously. The surface reality of the marriage I appeared to still be in, and the actual reality of what I was quietly, methodically dismantling beneath it. I went to the bank Daniel didn't use and opened an account. I transferred 3 months of living expenses from our joint checking. I called our life insurance provider and got the policy documents emailed to me at a new personal email address I had created for exactly that purpose. What I found in those documents required me to sit in my car in the parking lot of a CVS for several minutes with my hands in my lap and just breathe. Daniel was the primary beneficiary on my policy. That was expected. We had set it up that way mutually. What was less expected was the discovery, when I looked closely at the documents, of an amendment to the policy that had been filed 14 months ago. A rider adding accidental death coverage. A doubling of the payout in the event of accidental death. I had not known about this amendment. Daniel had handled the paperwork. My signature was on the amendment in a pale photocopy. And as I held the printed document and looked at it, I knew with a cold and absolute certainty that I had not signed it. That signature was not mine. I knew my own signature. I had watched it evolve over 40 years, knew its particular leaning, its specific break between letters, the tiny loop I made on the Y. This was close. It was practiced. But it was not mine. And if I had needed something to push me past the remaining 30% of doubt I had been carrying about what had happened at the restaurant, about what Daniel had poured into my glass, and why, this document obliterated it entirely. A life insurance policy amended to double the payout in case of accidental death, signed with my forged signature, filed 14 months ago. The financial transfers, the contact named R, the ring, the wine. The bile rose in my throat, actual, physical, hot, and I pressed my hand to my mouth and breathed through my nose until it subsided. My vision went briefly white at the edges, and I heard, very distantly, a car alarm somewhere in the parking lot. And then the world came back in full color and sound, and I looked at myself in the rearview mirror, and I said, very quietly, out loud, to the woman looking back at me, "He planned this. He planned all of it. And then, he chose the wrong woman to plan it on." I called Diane from the car. She was in a meeting, but her assistant interrupted her when I said it was urgent. When I told Diane what I had found, there was a brief silence on her end, and then she said, in a tone that was several degrees more serious than anything she had used before, "I need you to bring that document to me today. Are you safe?" "Yes," I said. "Go home. Behave normally. Come to me at 4. I went home. I behaved normally. Daniel was in his home office when I arrived, and he called a hello through the closed door, and I called one back. And I went to the kitchen and started making dinner with a steadiness that was so complete, it felt almost like dissociation, except that it wasn't. It was the precise opposite. A clarity so sharp it seemed to strip the edges off everything. I cooked pasta. I set the table. I called my mother to wish her a happy early birthday, keeping my voice light and warm throughout a 20-minute conversation. And when I hung up, I thought, I should call her back after this is over and tell her what her daughter just pulled off. She would be proud. At 4, I brought the insurance amendment to Diane. She had a specialist look at the signature, a forensic document examiner she used regularly. And he took 15 minutes with it and came back with an assessment he delivered with the dispassionate confidence of a man who had done this many times. The signature was not consistent with the samples Diane had pulled from other documents I had signed. It showed deliberate construction rather than spontaneous execution. It was, in his professional opinion, a forgery. Diane made another note. She was quiet for a moment, and then she looked at me with an expression that combined professional gravity with something that might, in a person who permitted herself feelings at work, have been called concern. "Megan," she said, "this has moved from a divorce case into something that requires a different kind of involvement. I want to share these findings with someone." "Law enforcement," I said. "Yes." "When?" "As soon as you're ready. But I want a few more pieces in place first. I want the forensic accounting done on the secondary account. I want the court filing for the financial restraining order in motion. And I want you, in the meantime, to continue as you are, carefully, ordinarily, safely." She paused. "Is there somewhere you can stay that he doesn't know about?" I thought of Carla. I thought of her guest room and her toddler's laughter, and the smell of the coffee she always had going, and the way she would sit across from me at her kitchen table and simply be solidly, unshakably there. "Yes," I said, "there is." "Good. Not yet. Don't move out yet. That alerts him. But have a bag ready." I drove home. I made a bag. I tucked it into the back of my car under a blanket with the practiced calm of someone hiding nothing unusual. I kept the notebook in my purse. I kept copies of every document in the cloud and on a thumb drive that I left with Carla. I kept everything. I slept in the guest room that night, under the pretense of not wanting to disturb Daniel, who I said seemed like he was still recovering. He accepted this without question, which told me something important about the state of our intimacy, that I could move to a different room and he would not object, because my proximity was no longer necessary to his plan in the way it had been. I lay in the guest room in the dark and thought about 9 years. I thought about Portugal and the Oregon coast and Sunday dinners, and a man who had read an olive oil label at a party and made me laugh for real. I grieved for that man, and I grieved for the woman who had believed in him. And then I let both of them go. Because here is what I knew by then. I knew about the transfers. I knew about the account. I knew about the ring. I knew about the email address. I knew about the insurance amendment. And I knew about the glass. But I did not yet know about Marcus. That revelation came 4 days later, and it came in a way I had not expected. And it was both the worst and, ultimately, in a complicated way, the most clarifying thing in the whole long sequence of things. Marcus called me on a Tuesday afternoon. I saw his name on my phone and answered immediately, because in 9 years, I had never had a reason not to. He said hello in his warm, disorganized way, and then he paused, and the pause was too long, and the warmth in his voice had something under it that I recognized immediately as the particular quality of a person who was working up to something difficult. "Hey," he said. "Can you talk?" "Yes," I said. I moved to the backyard. I stood on the porch and looked west, toward the mountains. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to know that I've been going back and forth about it for weeks, and He stopped. "I'm sorry. I should have told you sooner. That's the honest truth. I'm sorry." "Tell me now," I said. What Marcus told me in the next 12 minutes rearranged the last pieces of the puzzle into a picture so complete it was almost beautiful in its horrible symmetry. He had known about a woman, the R in the phone, the R in the ring engraving, for approximately 6 months. Her name was Rebecca. Daniel had introduced her to Marcus as a colleague at a professional event, but something about the introduction, the way Daniel had positioned himself near her, the way his voice had changed, the particular care with which he had not touched her in a public space, had told Marcus what kind of colleague she was. Marcus had confronted Daniel about it 3 months ago, and Daniel had denied it. And then, when the denial didn't land, had pivoted to something that Marcus recounted to me now with a voice that was thick with something between shame and rage. Daniel had told Marcus that the marriage was effectively over, that he and Megan had been growing apart for years, that he was in the process of getting his affairs in order to move on. And he had asked Marcus, requested, actually, which was a softer word than what he had done, to say nothing, to give him time to handle it his way. Marcus had said nothing. For 3 months. He had held it, and he had hated holding it. And he had called me now because he had received a call from Daniel yesterday, the day after the anniversary dinner, in which Daniel had said, with a strange and stilted urgency, that he needed Marcus to confirm, if anyone asked, that Daniel had been at Marcus's apartment for most of the evening last Thursday. Not all evening. Daniel had said Megan knew they'd had dinner out, but afterward. He needed Marcus to say Daniel had come over afterward and seemed fine. Normal. Sober. He wanted me to alibi him, Marcus said, and his voice broke slightly on the last word. "For our anniversary dinner," I said. My voice was completely level. "Meg, I don't know what he did. I don't know what happened at that dinner, but I'm not giving him an alibi. I'm not doing that. And I should have called you months ago, and I'm so sorry I didn't. And I'll do whatever you need. I'll talk to whoever you need. Marcus," I said, and something in my tone stopped him. "Thank you. I need you to write down exactly what I'm about to tell you to write down, and then I need you to call a number." I gave him Diane's number. I gave him a precise summary of what to tell her. He wrote it all down, and then he said, "Is he dangerous?" And I said, "I'm safe." And I said it with a confidence I largely meant. And he said, "I'll be on a plane if you need me." And I believed him absolutely. I called Diane immediately after hanging up. The alibi request was, she said, significant. It suggested that Daniel had anticipated needing an alibi for the evening in question, which created implications about his state of mind and intent that were relevant to the larger picture. She said she was moving up her timeline. She was filing the financial restraining order that afternoon. She had shared the insurance documents with a detective she worked with on complex domestic cases. She said, "Things are in motion. Are you ready?" I said I was ready. The financial restraining order went in on a Wednesday. By Thursday morning, Daniel had been notified, and his access to the joint accounts was frozen. I was in the kitchen when he came downstairs that morning with his phone in his hand, and I watched him come through the door and stop when he saw me sitting there. And for a moment, a very brief moment, the entire performance dropped, and I saw his face without the mask. It was a face I didn't know, pale and sharp and recalculating. And then, almost immediately, it assembled itself back into something recognizable, and he said, in a very controlled voice, "I see you've spoken to an attorney." "I have," I said. "Megan." He pulled out the chair across from me and sat down, and his hands were folded on the table in front of him with the deliberate stillness of a person managing anger. "I think we need to talk." "I agree," I said. "Whatever Carla or whoever has been telling you," he began. "It wasn't Carla," I said. "Sit back down, Daniel." He hadn't stood, but he had shifted forward slightly, and something in my voice, a register he hadn't heard from me before, steady and entirely without warmth, made him settle back. "I know about the account," I said. "The secondary account. I know the amount. I know the timeline. I know about the amendment to my insurance policy. I know about the forgery on that amendment. And I know about Rebecca." The silence that followed was a specific kind. Not the silence of someone caught without words, but the silence of a chess player who has just seen his opponent make a move several turns ahead of where he thought she was. Daniel's jaw tightened. A muscle jumped once in his cheek. His hands, still folded on the table, went slightly white at the knuckle joints. "That signature was mine," he said. It was the first move he had decided on, and it was a bad one, and some part of him knew it the moment it came out of his mouth. "No," I said. "It wasn't. I have a forensic document examiner's report that says so. Would you like to see it?" I had a copy in my notebook, which was on the table beside my coffee. I did not open it. I simply let it sit there. He looked at the notebook. He looked at me. He said in a quieter voice, "What do you want?" "What do I want?" I repeated. I let the words sit for a moment. "I want to understand what was in my wine glass last Thursday." The silence was absolute. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, a car passed slowly on the street. Daniel's hands unfolded and refolded. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said. "You switched glasses," I said. I switched them back. Something very small happened in his expression. Something that might have been, in another person and another circumstance, relief. The relief of a plan failing before it could be executed, but in this particular moment looked more like a curtain drawing back on something much uglier. He looked at me across the table, and he was still for a long time. And then he said, quietly, "What are you going to do?" "Everything," I said, and I meant it with a specificity and a completeness that I could feel in my whole body, from the steadiness of my hands to the clarity in my chest. "I'm going to do everything." The week that followed was a controlled demolition. Diane filed a second motion with the forensic accounting attached, outlining the transfers and the secondary account and its ownership, which the forensic accountant had traced to an LLC registered 2 years ago in Daniel's name alone. An LLC that also, the accountant noted, held 2 other assets: a partial interest in a real estate investment I had not known existed, and a vehicle registered in Rebecca's name for which Daniel had provided the down payment. The LLC was the architecture of a life he had been building beside ours, a parallel structure, carefully load-bearing, designed to be moved into once the original building was vacated. And the means of vacating it, the insurance, the wine, were intended to make the transition clean and permanent. The detective Diane worked with was a woman named Torres, brisk and precise, who came to Diane's office rather than to our house, which was a consideration I noticed and appreciated. Torres reviewed everything: the documents, the insurance amendment, the forensic examiner's report, Marcus's written statement about the alibi request. She was quiet while she reviewed, and when she looked up, she said, in the tone of someone delivering a weather forecast, "We're going to want to speak with your husband." She looked at Diane. "Is he represented?" "Not yet," Diane said. "He will be by tomorrow morning," Torres said. Daniel was contacted the following day. He retained an attorney within 3 hours of receiving the call, an expensive one, someone from a firm downtown that I recognized as one Daniel had mentioned admiringly in the context of corporate litigation years ago. The name lodged in my memory now with a dark irony. His attorney filed an immediate motion challenging the restraining order and disputing the forensic accounting findings. It was a vigorous and well-resourced response, which did not surprise me at all. Daniel was a man who had always fought intelligently and from a position of thorough preparation. The difference was that this time I had done the same. There was a hearing on the financial restraining order 12 days after the anniversary. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Not the dramatic, high-ceilinged chambers of television, but a workmanlike room with fluorescent lighting and wooden chairs, and a judge who wore reading glasses and looked, at first glance, as though she might be bored. She was not bored. Her name was Judge Patricia Wallace, and she had been doing family court for 19 years. And she had the particular attentiveness of someone who had heard every possible story and retained her capacity to be affected by the real ones. Diane presented our materials. Daniel's attorney presented theirs. Judge Wallace read documents with a methodical thoroughness that made the room very quiet. When the hearing concluded, the restraining order was upheld. The secondary account was frozen pending further review. Judge Wallace looked over her reading glasses at Daniel across the courtroom and said, in a tone that was impeccably measured, "Mr. Holt, the materials presented suggest a pattern of financial conduct that this court considers highly irregular. I'm going to recommend a full forensic audit." She paused. "I'd also recommend you speak with your attorney about the full scope of your exposure here." She said the last sentence with a restraint that somehow made it louder than if she had shouted it. Daniel's attorney made a small note on his legal pad. Daniel himself sat very still. Marcus was in the gallery that day. He had flown in the night before. He sat beside Carla, 2 rows behind me, and when the judge made her ruling and I turned, he met my eyes across the room and gave me a single nod, tight and solemn, and full of something I could only call a complicated love. I nodded back. Carla reached over and squeezed his arm. None of us said anything until we were outside in the cold October air. And then Marcus said, "I should have called you months ago." And I said, "You called me when I needed you." And I meant it. Because if he had called 3 months ago, I might not have believed him completely. And I might not have been as prepared, and the sequence of events might have been entirely different. The criminal investigation moved on its own timeline, separate from the divorce proceedings. I want to be clear about this. I did not know, and Diane did not promise, how far that investigation would ultimately go. What I knew was that Detective Torres had taken the case seriously from the first meeting, and that the combination of the insurance forgery, the documented alibi request, and whatever else the investigation would uncover had created a picture that law enforcement found compelling. Daniel was questioned twice. His attorney was present for both sessions. The contents of those sessions were not something I was privy to directly, but Diane kept me informed of what she could, and what she could tell me was that the investigation was ongoing and active, and that I should be patient. I was not required to live in the house during these proceedings, and after the financial hearing, I did not. I stayed with Carla for 2 weeks while the lawyers handled the interim arrangements, and then I moved into a short-term rental. A small apartment on the east side of Denver with tall windows and hardwood floors, and a kitchen that got afternoon light in a way that made everything in it look like it was worth something. It was the first space that had been only mine in 9 years, and the feeling of it, closing the door and knowing it was my door, making coffee in the morning and knowing the morning was entirely my own, had a quality I struggled to name for a few days, and then recognized, simply, as relief. The divorce proceedings were not fast, because nothing real is fast. They stretched over 5 months. 5 months of depositions and motions and a mediation session that collapsed in the first hour when Daniel's attorney presented a settlement offer so insulting in its construction that Diane laughed, once, quietly, before resuming her professional composure and declining on my behalf. The house became a central issue. Daniel argued that the down payment had been funded in part by a premarital account of his. I had Diane present the paper trail showing that the down payment had also incorporated funds I had saved before the marriage, combined in a joint account we had opened specifically for the purchase, combined in a way that was legally shared regardless of origin. The judge, not Judge Wallace, a different one for the divorce itself, agreed with Diane's analysis. The house was to be sold and the proceeds divided, after accounting for the $47,000 that the forensic audit had confirmed was removed and redirected. After accounting for that amount, the division was not equal in the way Daniel had apparently planned it to be. The secondary account was ultimately disgorged as part of the settlement. The real estate investment held by the LLC was sold and the proceeds entered into the marital estate. The vehicle registered to Rebecca in Daniel's LLC was another matter. Rebecca, it turned out, was not a passive figure in any of this, and what the investigation eventually surfaced about her knowledge and participation was something I learned about in pieces over subsequent months. Each piece landing with the particular exhaustion of a person who has already processed so much that additional information no longer produces shock, only a grim, nodding recognition. Daniel lost the engineering project he had been working on. The firm let him go quietly. No public statement, no drama, just a severance agreement and a cleared-out desk. Apparently, after the nature of the legal proceedings became known to the partners. He moved in with Rebecca temporarily. This I learned from Marcus, who kept in occasional contact with me throughout. A different and more honest relationship than the one we'd had when we were in-laws. Simpler and more mutual. Marcus told me Rebecca left Daniel 4 months after the anniversary, when the full scope of the investigation became clear to her. Whether from self-preservation or genuine moral reckoning, I did not know, and found I didn't particularly care. As for the wine glass, as for what had been in it, the investigation did not produce a definitive chemical finding. What it produced was a prescription sleeping medication prescribed under an old refill in Daniel's name that was found in our medicine cabinet during a search, a medication he had not disclosed to his doctor as a current prescription. A bottle that was near empty in a way that did not correspond to his claimed usage. Torres told me this obliquely and carefully, in the way of a person who wants you to understand something without saying it directly, in a context where it might later be misquoted. I understood her. The case was still open when I last heard anything official about it, but what I knew was this. Whatever had been in my glass was not there anymore, because I had switched them. And whatever it had been, It had not been intended for him. It was late March when I finally went back to the house. The sale had closed, the movers had cleared out months ago, but the real estate agent had called to say there were a few boxes the movers had left in the garage that needed to be retrieved before the new owners took possession. I drove over on a Saturday morning. The aspens were still bare, not yet leafed out, just reaching up against a sky the hard, bright blue of early Colorado spring. I had a key for the last time, and I used it to open the side door to the garage, and I found 2 boxes, mostly kitchen things I had never unpacked from a reorganization Daniel had done, and I had never gotten around to finishing. I loaded them into my car. I was about to leave when I walked back to the front of the house and stood on the porch for a moment, facing west. The porch still faced west. It still turned gold around 6 in the evening, I had no doubt. The craftsman bones of the house were still what they were, still as quietly beautiful as they had been the day we got the keys. Still the house that a younger version of me had stood in front of, with a set of keys feeling the particular weight of something built. I stood there for a while. I thought about that younger version. I felt something for her that was complicated and gentle, a kind of retrospective tenderness for the person she had been, and the trust she had placed, and the future she had believed in. I was not that person anymore. I was not sure that was entirely a loss. I got in my car and drove away and did not look in the rearview mirror. Summer came to Denver the way it always does, suddenly and completely. The mountains going green almost overnight, the city filling with the particular heat and distance smell of the high plains. I had signed a lease on the apartment with the afternoon light. I had gone back to work, which I had continued throughout all of this, but with a distracted maintenance quality that had finally, with the settlement finalized and the proceedings wound down to a slow simmer, resolved into something more like genuine presence. My team noticed. My manager noticed. In July, I was offered a position I had been informally competing for 2 years, a director role that came with its own budget and a team I would build myself and a scope of work I found genuinely interesting. I accepted it on a Thursday afternoon and then sat in my office for 15 minutes thinking about how the version of me who had been slowly, incrementally making herself smaller inside that marriage might have hesitated to accept it, might have wondered how Daniel would feel about the travel or the hours or the shift in our dynamic. I thought about that version of myself with great compassion and no desire whatsoever to return to her. Carla came over the week I started the new job. She brought wine, good wine, a bottle she had researched with a thoroughness that was very Carla, a small gesture that was very large. And we sat on my floor because I still hadn't bought a proper couch, and we drank it and talked for 4 hours about everything and nothing. And at some point she said, "Do you know what the bravest thing you did was?" And I said, "Switching the glasses?" And she shook her head. "Sitting at that dinner table for the rest of the evening and not letting him see your face change." I thought about that. She was right. The switching of the glasses was instinct. What came after, the stillness, the patience, the long and careful and unflinching work of understanding what I was up against and moving through it without panic and without premature action, that was the thing I had not known I was capable of until I had to be. The dinner table was the beginning of it. Everything else followed. Marcus called me in August. He was in Boulder for a friend's wedding and asked if I wanted to get coffee, and I said yes. And we met at a place downtown that had good pastries and tables outside in the warmth. He looked well. We talked for 2 hours in the easy way we always had, the conversation running through a dozen subjects without effort, and at one point he said, with the directness he had always been better at than his brother, "I think about what would have happened if you hadn't switched those glasses." I looked at him across the table. "I don't," I said. "I switched them." He nodded. He stirred his coffee. He said, "You seem different." And I said, "Yes, just that. Yes." Because I was, and the change was real and earned, and not something I needed to qualify or contextualize. The gold leaf earrings were in a small dish on my bathroom shelf. My mother's wedding gift, my talismans, the ones I had worn to the anniversary dinner that had ended everything and begun everything else. I had not worn them since that night. I had been uncertain about them, uncertain whether they carried a meaning I needed to leave behind or reclaim. In September, I put them on. I stood in front of my bathroom mirror and put them on, and the woman looking back at me was wearing gold leaf earrings and a director's title and a lease in her own name, and the particular expression of someone who had walked through a fire and come out knowing exactly what she was made of. I looked at her for a long time. She looked capable of anything. I poured myself a glass of wine that evening. I had chosen it myself, from a shop I liked, opened it myself, poured it myself. And I took it out to my small, east-facing balcony, and I sat in the last of the September light, and I drank it. It tasted like a very good Côte du Rhône. It tasted like nothing had been added to it. It tasted, entirely and completely, like mine. I watched my